becomes patronizing. And that's the one thing that we really have to consciously remove every time.
Identifying what you see the problem is, and then also offering a solution, and also offering a pathway to get from the problem to the solution. Hello, this is Waswo X Waswo, Evil O, coming to you once again from Udaipur. And today I'm with somebody I've known for a long time, one of my favorite people, Lina Vincent, who is talking to us, joining us from Goa. Hello, Lina. How are you?
Hi, Vasvo. It's good to see you. Good to hear you.
Yeah? Okay. It looks like you have a Mutushi Chakraborty behind you on the wall.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of my favorite works in my collection. And I thought it's lovely to have her here with us because she was the one who introduced us to begin with.
Is that a watercolor? Is it a watercolor or a print?
Yeah.
It's a watercolor. Oh, beautiful.
No, it's a watercolor.
Oh, nice. So today we're talking about activism. And I think we'll talk about it both in the context of just political activism, but also activism in the art world. Lina is a curator, if I didn't mention that. She's very well known as a curator these days. So I think first I'm just going to throw this at you, Lina. Oh, I've got to turn off my phone. First, I'm just going to throw at you, what is your definition of activism? How would you define activism? What is it?
Well, I think activism is to take action about something that concerns one. So for me, it can be in any space where whatever you're doing. As a curator, I can zero in on a concern and take action on it and do it in a sustained way, and that for me is activism. And
okay. I'm asking because I'm wondering, like, would you consider posting a meme on Facebook activism?
That's social media activism.
Okay.
Akin to armchair activism. It's easy, isn't it, to say, I am bothered about something that's happening so far away from me, and so let me post this on Facebook. And it's a very nice feeling and it gives you a good feeling, but it is not, in a sense, if you are not attempting to change anything actively within yourself or within the people around you, then I don't see what purpose it has.
Right.
But then
sometimes
social media...
The word is virtue signaling, which sometimes I just see there's a lot of virtue signaling from certain people in certain strata of society, but there doesn't seem to be any real commitment behind it. But I think the next step would be signing a petition.
Well, yes, numbers count, and it's important also to know about everything and to participate in whatever way is possible. But to maybe, I think, not leave it at that. To make sure the engagement then is sustained. It's not, just like a one-day thing. Okay, I signed this petition and that's good and I leave it there. But to continue to be concerned about something, to continue to engage over a period of time, because this is slow. To not romanticize or sentimentalize the idea of activism, but to actually understand what its purpose is and why you want to be part of it. Otherwise, it's better not to be part of it, is what I think.
Well, I think there's different grades to activism. There's, like you said, armchair activism, where once in a while you post a meme. And then there's maybe a little higher grade where you actually take the time to write something in social media or make tweets or, whatever you're doing. Then there might be the activism of circulating a petition, You get more and more, you sort of climb up the activist ladder when you start like making calls to the politicians, trying to write articles or get articles in the press, organizing a protest. I mean, you would agree,
Yeah,
like, so it's all sort of activism, but it's at different levels.
I agree. Yes, yes. It's at different levels.
So
And
you're,
it also depends on the kind of time you have to offer, because we all know that more often than not, to do something in the activist mode means you give up your time voluntarily. And so it also depends on that. It's not it's not something one can just take for granted and say, okay, I'm going to do this. It's a commitment. It's something that you say, I will give this time to it, and then take it forward in different ways. And I guess it cannot be sort of in an isolated position. Activism is something that has to spread and connect and network and sort of bring people together. I think that is that's something at a core element of what activism is and can do.
that's why I think we should not jump so much on the people who virtue signal, as they say, on social media, because sometimes that's the first step of getting involved. And we shouldn't necessarily poo poo it because, yes, it can be very superficial, and for many people it is. But then it also leads down, a pathway, and the pathway might lead to eventually showing up at protests or actually leading activism. And I think there's a difference between the leader of an activist movement or somebody who's a participant and somebody who just supports it from the sidelines.
Yeah, but I do want to say this though. Take, for instance, the whole George Floyd incident, the Black Lives Matter, etc. And considering that we do have a very hierarchical caste structure in India, and the kind of common practices that we have in our society are really to be noticeable all the time. And if when someone is more concerned about Black Lives Matter than, say, someone's discrimination right in your backyard, then I find it somewhat imbalanced.
Right. It's easy for
So,
somebody like me to sit here in India and, post and be concerned about the Uyghurs in China or something. Because I'm not in China, I don't suffer any of the repercussions from the Chinese government for doing that, while overlooking all sorts of problems that are right here in India. But then we're all in different situations because I myself, I'm very constrained about making any kind of social media comment these days about Indian politics because of my precarious visa situation. That I realize that, especially under the current regime, I can be barred from the country at any time. So if people follow me on Facebook, and I do, and yes, I come off more conservative, I'm sure, but the comments I make tend to be related to the West, to America, and to Britain and Europe, because I feel like I can comment on those without any real repercussions. Um, but that's kind of
yeah,
a,
absolutely.
when I hear myself say that, then I realize that's kind of a safe space activism. And sometimes, like you look at the protesters in Hong Kong, or even more the protesters in mainland China, I mean, they're really risking their freedom. They can be totally imprisoned and disappeared for their activism.
Yes, of course. But I think that your concern also comes from a deep attachment also to the place of your birth. No, it's
Uh,
not that it's totally alien to you. It is your native land, and despite the fact that you're like an Indian and you've been here for so long, you have grown up seeing that sort of, I think, a changing society, which is why at the moment you are discussing so much about uh, critical social justice and this whole idea of intersectionalism and, you know,
I
all
find
these things.
I find in that situation, I find that there's a lot of subtext that is getting overlooked in the mainstream media and the sort of things I see my Facebook friends sharing. There's just a whole lot of narrative that they're not hearing and not understanding because they didn't grow up in America and they don't really understand the politics and the social situation there, which is a problem. But I want to talk more about you, at least at the beginning. So you're highly involved in environmentalism, global warming, especially in the particular of Goa. I think you think locally and act. No, what is it? Think globally and act locally. Almost got
Locally.
it reversed. Okay. So do you just want to tell people a little bit about what you've been involved in?
Yeah, that'll be nice. So actually, sort of to start off right in the beginning, why this sort of space has been interesting for me. I think to say very quickly, I did my arts education in Bangalore, and I was very much observing a lot of people's work, like let's say someone like Surekha or Suresh Gopal Reddy or Jasmine Pateja, you know, Blank Noise. And in the process of developing my work as a writer at that time, I spoke to a lot of people and I wrote about a lot of things that made me think very positively about this space where art can actually extend a certain idea in a very positive way and a powerful way within a larger group of people. And I began to understand that this power lies not in just presenting something in the gallery space, but having this public engagement. So this is way back in whatever the early 2000s is when, you know, this experience started. But my first official association with something that used art in terms of talking about climate change and environmental consciousness and so on came with my work with Art Making Waves, which is actually an international organization that invites artists and curators and people who are working in the creative fields to sort of build these platforms to discuss dialogue, also think of creative solutions, not only to be observers but actually to actively, you know, um, work on awareness, education, taking the message out in some way.
I was
So
going to say
that's where.
that all activism, you have to be very clear as to identifying what you see the problem is, and then also offering a solution and also offering a pathway to get from the problem to the solution. You know, and if you don't do that, then you just become somebody who's ranting and screaming, and it basically is worthless. It doesn't help the progress at all.
Yes, yes, exactly. So that's I think a very it's a very meaningful way to put it. Absolutely, there is no point in doing something as a sort of tokenism, but to really sort of see the path. And it may not actually produce a solution immediately because these things are long-term engagements. It's not possible to do something for 2 days and say, okay, you know, I've done my bit and whatever happens. So my sort of large engagement began with that, but then because the focus was in India, I of course began to look at work that was around me and problems that were around me. I was in between also focused on women's empowerment and the idea of feminism, but that continues to be a concern, but it's not my overriding concern. I do participate, you know, in those dialogues as well, but environmental concerns somewhere took the upper seat, let's say. So right here in Goa, my work, of course, with Art Making Waves continued, but I also became a part of the Goenchi Mati movement, that is, talking about the loot, that is to say the sort of disparity in the amount of money that the mining companies made and what is actually not given out at all to the government or the public. And difficult things like intergenerational equity now, which can be talked about with a lot of jargon and with large documents. How do you convert something like that into an expression that people can understand in general?
So
That's the sort of space where,
for people who don't know the mining situation in Goa, if I understand it correctly, and you can correct me, it's basically there's a lot of mining that goes on of iron ore primarily, and
yes,
laborers toil at this for very little money. Corporations make a huge amount of money, and most of the ore then gets shipped to China, to the iron factories in China, the steel factories, and the Goan government doesn't really get that much money for the people, although I'm sure a lot of money goes into the back pockets of politicians. Am I summing that up pretty well?
well, a lot of mining was also done illegally. So that's why there are large amounts of money unaccounted for, unpaid to the government, monies that have to come back and be used for also the reparation of the lands that were really devastated. Large swathes of land in South Goa, all filled with holes, and the soil has been polluted, the rivers have been polluted, the the miner, the mining dependents themselves in all those villages have been affected deeply, mentally, physically, health wise. So, so the Goenchimati movement is something that has been, along with, of course, Goa Foundation and Claude Alvarez, working towards finding a good solution towards getting all that looted money back, but also making sure that the resources are not finished within our generation, but something is kept for future generations as well.
Yeah, when you
Because
think
it doesn't belong to us.
most tourists, whether they come from other states or from abroad, they think of Goa as the beaches, which are still quite beautiful when you're on the beach. But if you drive into Goa from Karnataka, and you go over the mountains, you just red dust everywhere on the road, and trucks and trucks and trucks full of iron ore all the time. I mean, they're literally in convoys of 10 trucks in a row or something. Sometimes it's quite
Absolutely.
amazing.
And even right now, even during the lockdown, there were hundreds of trucks moving on the road on an everyday basis, because this was considered to be an essential activity, which is really ridiculous. How can you have trucks moving around in hundreds when there's a lockdown? So, this is the sort of situation here. Besides, as you know, in Goa, there is also a large real estate boom. Tourism is not really handled ethically across the region. So there are additional problems to the ocean, to the rivers, to the mangrove regions, the biodiversity, the aquatic biodiversity, the Khazan lands. So
Goa is an
it's a
ecological disaster all over the place right now. I hate to say it. And it's really a tragedy because it's one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful state in India. And
Yeah,
in the old
exactly.
days, it used to be whenever I would enter Goa, if I was coming in from Maharashtra or Karnataka, coming up from Karnataka or Kerala, whatever. And as soon as you got into Goa, it's like, oh God, I'm back in heaven, because it was just so beautiful and the weather was always perfect. And, but I don't get those feelings anymore.
Well, it is still beautiful, and I guess that what we have to do is fight for what is there. So it's there are lots of artists, I have to say here, who are really looking at things, looking at their roots, trying to preserve heritage in many different ways. whether it's oral histories, whether it's cultural practices, or food, or other sorts of traditions. Many of them are working on documentation processes, on preserving things, on trying to sort of rejuvenate
Do you want to
this
name a few
heritage.
particular artists and talk a little about their projects? Just a
Yeah,
couple?
so I'm involved with several young artists here. One of them, Kalpit Gaokar, who in fact comes from Netravali in South Goa, and he has been documenting. First, he began to document the loss of these farming tools and objects that were disappearing from the landscape. Then he began to look at community, and generations of stories and myths and legends that were disappearing from our everyday life. And then he is now actually working on a very interesting project that brings in an important area of concern right now, which is the Bhagwan Mahavir National Park, and the My Molem project, which is in fact using a lot of art on Instagram and on Facebook to push this idea that the EIA is falsely made, and that these three large projects that have been given permission, the double tracking of the railway, the electric lines, and one more project, they are not necessary, and they cannot and should not be taken through a park. So Kalpit is among the artists who is working on a project also to discuss the problem areas of destroying a national park. There are other artists like Sagar Naik Mule, who is looking at the heritage of boats and boat making, and what that entire profession actually did to for the region and to the region, and how nobody makes boats anymore. Obviously, because mechanical systems have removed and lots of professions. There's Devesh Gadekar, who is documenting folk instruments, and he's doing very, very contemporary experiential installations that connect our present day to a memory of the past. So in various different ways, but there are also people who are all looking at very serious issues like the mining. Kedar DK, Shailesh Dabolkar, Subodh Kedkar, whom you spoke to last week, and many artists, Ramdas Kadekar, Kaushalya. There are really a lot of people who are participating. And
so all of that's very good, and I mean, I'm glad those artists are doing that, but my fear whenever we talk about activism in art is that it reaches basically a very select, I don't want to use the word elite, but a select crowd, sort of the sort of people who go to Sunaparanta Art Center, and see things, going to the cafe or whatever. It doesn't really reach the masses by and large. So I'm curious if you've been involved, you can address that comment, but also have you been involved in any sort of activism that is outside of the curatorial realm? Have you actually taken place in protest or anything like that? I'm just curious.
Yes, so that was the beautiful thing about the two public exhibitions that we did with artwork that came for the Goenchi Mati movement, and the future we need. That is what it's called now, the future we need. And so we did this in public parks. The first one was in Azad Maidan, and all the artwork was printed on paper and then put up on strings, and there were photographs, there were images that the artists donated. We made prints of everything and we hung everything out, and people actually engaged with it, spoke, discussed the artwork. And for the artist as well, the outreach was much greater than simply being within a white cube space, because that doesn't work. very essentially art, activism, artivism, as they say, has to go out there into the public space. It has to have people look at it because art can touch emotionally. That's the power of it.
Has there been
Uh,
any attempt to do like mural projects or anything, sort of activist murals that send a message across in Goa?
yes,
Like
yes,
don't
in
use
fact,
plastic straws kind of murals or things like that. Um,
yeah, I think that there's an artist here called Swabu Kohli, and he has done a couple of really striking murals in North Goa that were part of another project. And I think that the beauty of these kind of mural projects is that the community is involved and that they make choices, because in the end it's about those choices. And when the community gets involved, then the message is able to, really go far. So yes, there are lots of designers, artists. Orijit Sen, I mean, I'm a fan of his, and he is saying wonderful things with his with his art, with his practice, and it's political, it's
Orjeet
emotional,
Sen, you
it
mean
pushes
the
the thing.
Orjeet Sen, the cartoonist? Is that who you're talking about?
Yes,
The
yes, I
cartoonist, yeah. I consider him a cartoonist because he does cartoons, but I know he's an artist. But
yeah, the
yeah,
I mean, he's known for his protest posters,
right.
so splendid. It's very inspiring. It's very inspiring when this sort of thing happens, and there's performance, and there's video, and there's lots of things now that can go online as well. So it's really powerful, and it's possible to create a vision then, no, a vision of something that's more positive,
I
just like
always,
Jethro Buck said in one of your talks.
I think many, yeah, Jethro Buck, he's very concerned about rewilding. Um, what was I going to say? I think that sometimes, in society structure, it's very hard to get the people on the top to make decisions to change because they move slowly and also they get paid off a lot. There's money involved. And, but it's much better to change from the lower strata, get the beach shack owners themselves concerned about the plastic straw issue or the plastic chair issue or
Yeah,
whatever it is, make them understand that it's a good thing for them to change. It'll actually be more appealing to tourists and blah, blah, blah. You can give your own sales package to them, and then you slowly build it up from the grassroots to the higher level till eventually the people on the top have to change their thinking. Um, but
exactly. Now, what happens often with this sort of maybe a scholarly approach or something that is from the intellectual level, it becomes patronizing, and that's the one thing that we really have to consciously remove every time. We don't know more, essentially. It's something that we have to, like you said, we have to blend in at every level and not have that top down approach. Now,
yeah,
it's difficult to say that because we are speaking in English, and sometimes you don't know the language and you're wondering about communication. But I think there are many different ways in not forcing a very patronizing attitude onto anything and say, I'm at that level and let me try and absorb.
I was trying to get that message across to somebody just this morning, actually, somebody who lives in New York, and she posted on Facebook that one of her friends is a police officer who is also Native American, and he is voting for Trump. And she was appalled by that. And she was asking for suggestions how to get him not to vote for Trump. And like I joined in a little bit, and it's like, number one, he probably knows more about being a Native American police officer than you do. So you have to give him credit. And whatever you do, don't approach him with the attitude that you're voting against your own self-interests. because he's probably aware what his own self-interests are. And maybe the police officer identity right now is taking a higher level than the Native American identity. You understand? So you have to be careful so that you don't sound like because you're a white person, you know, you can't act like you're like preaching to him about the proper way to vote, you know, because that's the way you alienate people.
Well, but yeah, that's how it is. No, this what we were speaking about before, the whole culture of grievance,
Yeah.
of of this sort of dichotomy of discrimination against privilege, and the baggage that it carries is becoming sort of overwhelming.
Well, I very
And
much believe in privilege. I mean, I recognize privilege and I believe I have privilege to some extent. I just do not like attaching the word privilege to the race because I know so many like Indians here who to me have a whole lot more privilege than I do, considering their
yeah,
social background, their wealthy social background. I mean, you know, people in the art community who aren't Indian, who think nothing of flying off between Documenta and Art Basel and Art Hong Kong in you know, like a whirlwind tour, you know, and post photos of themselves, you know, having cocktails at the best hotels in Europe, and you know, to think that they can hide behind this thing that somehow they're oppressed and I have privilege doesn't work for me. Do you understand?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I have difficulties with that whole approach, and I think you can make a better world if you take people as individuals and communities for what they are and try to work for some sort of justice among those people. But when you start labeling people according to these immutable characteristics, even if you think you're doing it in a positive way, it's like, yeah, there is the Native American policeman who's going to vote for Trump. I mean, get over it. You know, not everybody is the same. Even when they're in a group, you might think, well, they ought to be doing this,
Yeah,
but not necessarily. So,
yeah, but
um,
it's become like that, no? That you have to take a side and be that side very publicly,
mm,
and that's something really difficult because
right,
it puts things in black and white, whereas it's not like that at all.
right. There's
There's
very
so
little
much
room
in
for
between.
discourse of in between, you know, that and
Yeah,
if you do anything like, well, like I am personally, I'm quite liberal left on some issues and I'm quite conservative on other issues. It's like people like me, I mean, both sides will shut you out. They'll just shut you out. And I know this because I belong to some more conservative Facebook groups. And like I get attacked there horribly, you know, because I happen to not believe certain things that they believe. And it's like, ooh, you know, like that. But then the same thing can happen in a liberal crowd or a left crowd if they find out that, you know, you're not for open borders. It's like, so
yeah.
it's
But
hard to.
Basu,
Hmm.
what about you? Sorry to interrupt, but what about you? Do you see yourself also as being activist? And I know that that there's sometimes your work also is overtly political, even though it's softened by the aesthetics, but you make some strong commentaries, I
I
think.
like to think it's more cultural than political, but I mean, you know, these days culture and politics have merged in so many ways. Well, I have an activist side, and for people who don't know, but when I was a senior in high school in the US, we had the first ever Earth Day on April 22nd. I forget the year, I think it was 1970, if I remember right. And I organized a march for the first Earth Day. It was our local state senator, Gaylord Nelson, who organized the first Earth Day. It was his idea. He promoted it. He got it to be a nationwide thing initially, then it was taken up internationally. But I put up posters in the high school and said, well, you know, Earth Day, and I organized a march. We were going to march between the high school and the city hall and have a protest in front of city hall, you know, for it wasn't a global warming concern at the time. It was just an ecological preserve our wilderness type of concern. And even at that time, we were concerned about plastics and things like that and air pollution. Um, so the administration of the high school immediately took note of this, called me into the office, and they actually gave me, I was in a good suburban high school. It was all white. There was one person of color, and I still remember him. He was Native American. His name was Mudrock, and he was kind of a badmash, but everybody liked him. But anyway, we organized this march, and the administration, Mudrock, yeah, and the administration got involved and said, you know, they had to make sure I had the right permits and all of that, and they actually helped. It was quite amazing to me. And so we did our march, and we all had plastic bags, and we picked up litter along the way and ended up at City Hall. And then at City Hall, they invited us in, and we heard different talks by different people that the City Hall had arranged. So it was basically picked up by the Democratic Party. You can understand. And, you know, and that's what politicians do, you know, they pull you in. And then my second activist activity when I was younger is I organized, and this is in dispute, but I would say I and a person named Bill Manure organized the first gay pride parade in my home city of Milwaukee. And now other people claim it wasn't the first. We're told that some drag queens had a procession through a park, you know, a year earlier than we did. I don't know if that's true. Then other people claim that ours wasn't a real march, and the first official one was 2 years later, but to us it was the first. And we got the proper permits and all of that. And then last minute, the police told us we couldn't walk in the middle of the road. And you know, we fought with the police at that time, not physically, but verbally, and said, well, we have all the permits. We're walking down the middle of the road, whether you like it or not, because we have the permits. And so we marched down, I think it was Highland Avenue to MacArthur Square, where we had a stage set up. And one of the speakers was Miriam Ben Shalom, and she was a lesbian who had fought a case against the U.S. Army to, you know, at that time you would be kicked out of the army if you were gay or out of the military. And she was fighting a case, and she was quite well known. So she was sort of a keynote speaker. So yeah, I had my activist days, but I think where I part from where the kids are at now is that for me, like the ecological activism was because I want to live in a world that's beautiful and sustainable. Okay. And I think anybody should agree to that, no matter what your politics are. And the gay activism was because I wanted to be able to partake in the system at an equal level, but I didn't want to destroy the system. I didn't want to replace the system. I just wanted to be able to participate in it at an equal level. And these days, if you look at what's going on in the US, it's more about destroying the system and replacing it with something else. So that's a very different thing. And I was never up for that. But anyway, that's my own history and point of view.
But talk a little bit about the statue toppling and the sort of serendipitous connection with your piece in your show.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. That's already in the articles. Well, I understand the Confederate statue issue, and I understand that it's time for them to go. I'm not sure if there ever was a time for them, but like I said in the one article in First Post, that when they were first put up, you know, what's being claimed now is that it was all about intimidating newly freed slaves, although there was also in the early days some notion, because you had these two armed camps that literally went to war against each other and killed a whole lot of people in the Civil War. And afterwards, there was reconstruction to bring the South back into the realm of the North and unify the country. So allowing the South, you know, like Atlanta was burnt to the ground. We forget these things. You know, Sherman's march to the sea, he burnt Atlanta to the ground. He burnt Chattanooga to the ground. I think he almost burnt New Orleans to the ground. So, you know, when you think of how devastated the South was, there was an attempt to get Southerners to have a sense of pride again. So they were allowed to put up statues to their heroes, basically. You know, it was a trade-off between that and allowing them to participate once again in the Union as the United States. But, you know, everything has its time and place, and their time and place is gone. And so I'm happy they're gone. I'm happy they're being removed.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. And I understand why Black Americans would be upset to see them. I mean, I would feel upset if I saw, I don't know, I can't think of somebody I'd be upset with if I saw their statue. I suppose I wouldn't want statues of Hitler standing around the US or India for that matter. But then when they started moving on to some, I mean, it just got ridiculous. I mean, I thought they were wrong in tearing down Jefferson and Washington, because you start judging people only by, and this is so common in this day and age of cancel culture, judging people only by one part of their life, one thing they've said or whatever, and they're canceled, you know? And it's like Jefferson, I mean, you know, he was the inspiration behind the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, and, you know, so many things that gave impetus to later movements like the women's movement, the suffragette movement, the abolitionist movement to free the slaves. All of that was contained in a lot of Jefferson's thought. So even though he was a slave owner, he was progressive for his times. And people fail to contextualize this stuff. They judge everything by our own contemporary times, and you can't do that. So in my home state of Wisconsin, again in Madison, they tore down our statue of Progress, you know, who was a woman. It was a woman carrying, I think, a sword or something like that. Very noble statue. And it was actually designed by an art student at the Art Institute of Chicago. I forget the year, but very early in the 20th century. And it was to represent progressivism. And they tore it down and dragged it through the street. And then the other one was Hans Christian Haig, who was an abolitionist who actually formed a militia in those days. And his militia went after people who were capturing runaway slaves and returning them to their masters in the South. So Haig was going after these other militias that were capturing slaves because they had a bounty on their head, returning them to the South, and Haig was going up against those militias and fighting them and making sure that the slaves were kept free and were not returned to the South. So and he actually died in the process. He was actually killed, you know, in the process. So, you know, here's a man who basically fought for emancipation, and yet they cut down his statue and cut off his head and threw it in the lake. And it's like, this is out of control now. And no matter how you look at it, it's out of control. So
yeah, I remember what you said in your previous monologue. You spoke about the Tara, I think it was, and being cut out from the same cookie cutter.
Oh, yes.
From the same mold, I think. And I found that very, very effective in understanding what's happening now and why this whole idea of not being one to be identified by only one specific thing is definitely a consideration. That was interesting.
We all want to be individuals, you know. So I have mixed feelings about the activism that is going on now. I support any kind of activism for the environment, you know, still, obviously. But I'm a little more suspicious about some of the other activist movements that are currently going on because of their fundamentalist mindset, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
yeah, I think that, yes, I mean, activism does hold a kind of power, and I think that power can be as as bad as any other or as good as any other?
Well, if you got me talking now rather than you, but if you have to keep that goal in mind, you identify a problem and then you see the goal that you wish to have and the path towards it, well, then it shouldn't get politicized in the way that you no longer listen to certain problems that would align with the problem you've identified because it's been politicized. So, I mean, that's very evident in the Black Lives Matter movement, because the number of Blacks who get killed by police officer in the US is actually really small. In 2019, it was only 9 people. If I remember my stats right, who were actually murdered by police. And proportionally, it's out of proportion to the Black community when you compare it to the number of white people who were killed, but still it was only 9 people. But the number of Black people who are killed in homicide and Black on Black violence in the neighborhoods is astronomical. If you're a young Black kid growing up in America, homicide is rated as your number 1 probable cause of death. It's higher than suicide. It's higher than it's more likely that you might be shot. And I hope I'm remembering these statistics right. I think I am. So that's a horrible problem. So if you care about Black lives, and even though the right wing likes to talk about Black on Black crime, well, the left shouldn't just like dismiss it and say, oh, that's a right wing talking point. It's like, well, this is real. So you have to think about that too and identify problems and solutions for that as well, which might be better schools, which might be helping Black families stay together, because the Black family now is very, I think the statistic is something like 70% of young Black men grow up in single parent households now. I mean, that's staggering. And this was actually pointed out by a Democrat, by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, way back in the, I think, late 60s or early 70s, and he got jumped all over at the time. And at that time, it had only crept up to like 40%, but nobody wants to talk about it because it's not politically correct. So now it's up to 70%. Well, a young boy who grows up without a father in the home, and maybe this might sound sexist, but a young boy who grows up without a father in the home doesn't get a whole lot of role modeling other than from his neighborhood drug dealer. So,
yeah.
Am I speaking out of turn here, or?
No. But when you said school, it reminded me. So Anne Marie Melster, that is one of the founders of Artport Making Waves, while in this process of working with her, I've conducted so many school workshops on climate change, using art, using video as something that takes it out there. And the school age, the children, when they are sort of opened up to these various ideas, and also about rights, about class, about region, about everything, when it's spoken of openly at a very young age, then it's possible that when they are adults, they are going to look at things at least possibly in a balanced way. But we are not able to do that. We are not able to provide that within our educational system. And that's how it ends up being the situation where also art and culture is sort of separated from the rest of everything. And why we are having this big question in putting up, let's say, something like The Broken Foot, which is an exhibition organized by Rumi Samadhan and Prabhakar Damle, I think. And it's talking about the constitution, it's talking about labor rights, it's talking in reference to the migrants that were displaced over the period of the lockdown. And when if these kinds of things were an important cultural and artistic engagement for everybody, then the separation of the gallery and the museum and the public life need not have been there. But what I'm speaking of, I suppose, is a sort of ideal situation, but that's what we really want and need, I think, in terms of everybody being able to engage with these ideas and have a dialogue about it, whatever spurs it. If art is going to spur you to think, then that's great. If poetry is going to do it, if a film is going to do it, if a regular whatever, you know, is going to push you to think and contemplate and visualize something, then that's great. But what is happening is that really in our schools, unfortunately, most of them, this edge is sort of blunted off. The only thing that matters is high grades, good marks, and the idea of success, which is in a specific box. So, you know, where I mean, I have digressed also, but the fact is that whatever, you know, even activism or even activism is doing now, it can connect when this openness exists or this openness is encouraged and pushed. Otherwise, everyone will really choose to remain safe. And being safe is really not the most important thing.
No, it's
It
not
is about
really an
going
option
out
when you
there.
have, being safe isn't an option when you have existential threats posed against us like we do with climate change. You know,
Yes,
you can't
yes.
afford to just stay safe, you know, and
But
climate,
there is an illusion of it.
yeah, yeah. No, I've always felt that art, short stories, poetry, all of those things are wonderful ways to open children up to sensitivity, you know, and a notion. I mean, that's what the humanities were always originally about, to instill people a way of thinking in which you could empathize with other people, you could put yourself in the shoes of other people and understand what it must be like to be that migrant laborer walking down the road from Delhi all the way back to Orissa or wherever it might be. That's what the humanities is all about. That's why I always love stories by like Salman Rushdie and other people, because when you read them, he can like put himself in different social stratas and characters, and he kind of gives everybody's feelings and perspectives and why they're struggling with this and this. So, I mean, he sees it from all angles and how they all sort of collide and how it's very hard to fit all those pieces together, you know, to make something good. But that's what the humanities ought to do for you. Just think more broadly, and it makes you a more tolerant person. And I do think we need a whole lot more tolerance, and not just the branded tolerance, but I mean real tolerance, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Tolerance, acceptance. We need it at every level.
And the other thing is when you're aiming towards your goal, and everything gets politicized, of course, and activism especially, it'll be politicized. But when you have party systems like we have in democracies, and you identify one party's, you know, like against us and one party's for us, or, you know, you break it down to those general lumps. Sometimes people don't realize when the party you think is against you actually might come up with a proposal which would help you in some way or whatever. And there's kind of this knee-jerk reaction like, oh no, you know, because it came from the wrong source. And you have to be open enough to understand that, yeah, maybe they have a good idea. Maybe this would actually help solve the problem in some way. And I see that a lot in the US.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So
What do you think now about
well, I just want to diverge a little bit.
about
What?
Sorry, continue.
I don't want to interrupt you, but anyway, I want to diverge back a little bit back to the US because it kind of follows that stream of thought. But so in efforts, once again, to help the lower class Black community, and I have to emphasize there's a lot of, middle class and upper class Black African Americans now. But to help the lower strata, I mean, there's a big divide because the Democrats tend to like to push the idea of putting more money into the public schools, more money in the public schools. And the Republicans have pushed for a long time the idea of school choice, which is basically they give vouchers to the families for a certain amount of money, and the families can make a choice that they can use the voucher not for the public school, but for a private school if they choose. Okay. Now, school choice has had a mixed track record, but in general, it seems to work pretty well because the private schools don't have to contend with teachers' unions and all of this. And, it's like those schools that don't do well, the parents don't send their children to them anymore and they don't get the money. So there's a financial incentive for them to turn out well-educated students. So school choice is actually a quite popular idea within the Black community and the Latino community, the different minority groups. And I used to be vehemently opposed to it because being, identity politics, speaking as a gay man, it was like, well, now parents can funnel money into fundamentalist Christian schools. Now parents can funnel money into Muslim madrasas if they choose to, where they're going to teach the children that homosexuals are horrible and evil, So I was opposed to it. But now that I'm older, and it's like, well, the problem is so huge. Why wouldn't you grasp onto this as something that could help and could be a fix?
Right.
And so I'm not as opposed to it as I used to be, especially now that the public school systems have become so left-wing, they've got their own kind of leftist indoctrination going on, then why not let a private school also have a chance? So solutions can come from various angles. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't give more money to public schools and help them upgrade and get proper computer systems in their schools and science labs and all of that. But I don't see that people should be so close-minded that they just block out another option. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it gets very divisive and it all just breaks down by party, as to what you support.
Yeah, the groups, the tight groups. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, what do you see? I mean, do you really see some important activism among artists, say, currently? And in India, is there something that strikes you as being effective?
I don't know if I'm one to speak. I think among the upper echelon of better known artists, not so much. And if there is, I would say it comes from a feminist perspective. Feminism, yes, that I see among better known artists. I don't really see very many better known artists dealing with class divides or caste divides. That I don't see. Correct me if I'm wrong. Whenever people are talking about those issues, it always seems to be the artists who aren't getting noticed and aren't getting a platform by and large. And you do a good job of platforming those people, I know. So.
Yeah, I think it's really important because all voices need to be heard. And I think you've done a lot also, Vasbo. I mean, over the years, the number of young artists who have been simply given the encouragement to carry on working by you, I think that's something that I really admire. And that's why you have so many fans.
I do. Maybe I do sometimes. I'm not sure of that
Yeah.
actually, but maybe I do. I try
No.
to do my own
And
thing with this channel too. This channel is important to me right now. I think it gives me a chance to give some of my own views, but also I like to bring in people like you who can give different views. I have returned. Sorry for that little
that was quick.
interrupt. This iced tea is running through me. I always joke that I'm drinking whiskey on these things, but it's iced tea.
Oh gosh.
So I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, okay.
I want to ask you a question. So what do you think are the most important elements to make activism successful? Have you considered this?
So I think, yeah, I think there are a few things that, some of the things that I've already mentioned. One is that if you're using art, that is, talking about activism using art, one is that it has to exit from a closed space in terms of talking about a gallery or a space where a very limited number of people are going to access the material. So I think one of the first things is to take it out there, to be within a community that is being affected by the discussion, and that way it really, really extends itself beyond the original idea. The second thing is, like I mentioned before, it shouldn't be a top-down approach. It cannot be lecturing and patronizing and saying this is the right thing to do, so you've got to do it. But rather, I think be a very a sort of process of osmosis where the ideas are being very, very sort of beautifully shared in a platform, let's say. One of the things that I've seen works really well is transdisciplinary collaborations, where we're not just saying, okay, I'm going to call watercolor artists together to talk about the ocean. No, but to really produce interactions that bring in ideas as much as possible. So I think I identify very much with the transdisciplinary approach. When activism comes alive with the participation of many different types of people, I think then it's most likely to be successful, as my own experience has shown. I think sustained approaches are really crucial, because again, you cannot do something for 1 or 2 days and say, okay, I've done it, and that's enough. You have to work on it day after day and year after year and keep it in your mind all the time. In fact, if you want to really contribute something in a socio-cultural, political manner. An artist cannot really be separate from all these things. It has to feed into that same system where the artist is living and working. It simply does not make sense to talk about something which is physically, emotionally, and intellectually separate. Though one can do it, but I think the meaning and the communication is something that has to come from a very personal interaction with that problem or with that space.
You're getting quite activist in that you're activating your camera a lot and it's bouncing up and down.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So you have to be a little careful of that. You're getting
okay. Let's we lose the video altogether.
No,
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah, and I think that these are some of the things that I feel are really crucial, and because art really is a language that can touch people emotionally. And what happens when one adds a lot of jargon to something is that it's misunderstood, misrepresented. Sometimes it's not even, looked at. But whereas art really is powerful because it can do all these things without, and it continues. I think the beauty about art is that it doesn't end with the creation of it. The interpretation keeps it going on. As many different people look at it, as many different people think different thoughts, that's how it goes on living. And I think that's the quality about your work, which really can bring different responses with different people. And to sort of talk about some effective activism that I feel I would like to point out with certain projects that have been done. One is the Shweta Bhattaras Gram Art project, which in fact I was reminded of right now because of the Rakhis. The Rakhis with the seeds. So it's giving a space to the identification that yes, women are caregivers and also carriers of seeds in many different ways. But also the idea that we have to look at climate change with these simple things like preserving our organic seeds, our rice, our grains,
Yeah,
and
they're doing some really nice things. I remember Shweta was part of our coronavirus apocalypse series at one point, if I remember right.
yeah. So Gram Art project is one. I always think of Blank Noise, Jasmine Pateja, and the whole idea of public participation in understanding what a woman feels on the street and reclaiming public space. I think it's been a very sustained project over a decade, and it's really been effective. And that sort of activism is something that I think is crucial for us. Um, Someone else I can think of is what Parag Tandel is doing right now with his community.
What is
You
he
know,
doing? What is he doing? I'm not
uh,
aware.
one of his projects right now is to build an archive. He's building an archive of recipes. He's using food as this very crucial social identity, and he is bringing in all this material which is collected from the community, and really involving people in the manner in which his own art is talking about it. So I think that's something that's interesting and effective. And yeah, I mean, these are some projects that have inspired me also. And I feel that artists do have the time, they do have the responsibility as well. uh, you know Being an artist doesn't separate you from these things. I think one has to be responsible, whether you're a curator or art historian or artist or photographer or whatever. I think that um, a basic responsibility is there towards your social setup and your environment, and you have to contribute to it. That's rather a patronizing statement, but
Well, no,
well,
there's truth. I mean, activism should begin at home. Is one way to think about it. If you're worried about the environment, look around your own house and start thinking about what you personally are doing wrong with the environment. You can't be complaining about plastic bags if you're still going to the market and not carrying your cloth bag, if that's still proper. I don't know, to collect things, but at least a reusable bag. But if you personally are always taking plastic bags from the grocery market, well, then you're part of the problem. you know and so it does begin at home.
yeah, exactly.
Now, in Thailand, they finally did um, get plastic bags banned from all the 7-Eleven stores. I don't think it's nationwide, but they did it from the 7-Eleven, which is actually a big step because if you ever go to Thailand, 7-Eleven is on every corner almost. I mean, it's one of the most popular chains, convenience store chains in the country. So literally almost anywhere in Thailand, you can look around and see a 7-Eleven somewhere. And they were all just cranking out these plastic bags like crazy. But Thailand has a big problem because one of Thailand's big industries is actually making plastic bags, you know? So it's to cut out the plastic bags is also cutting out a big industry of theirs, but they're also a major polluter of the ocean because of this. If you look at all the big rivers that are mainly responsible for ocean plastic, almost all of them are located in Asia, you know, China, Thailand, Vietnam. So yeah, I mean, I think sometimes you do need a top-down approach if you can get the government or whatever, or a corporate head or whatever, just to make a decision. Okay, for the sake of, even just for the sake of our corporate image, we will stop giving plastic bags away.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do need policy makers. We do need authority in some way sometimes to extend these things, because without that, these are the systems that we live in. So without that, it's difficult to create that change that we may want. It's complex actually. Yeah.
It is, but I think, people kind of poo-poo people refusing straws and things, but you can make a change as a consumer, because if you refuse to buy it and enough people refuse to buy it, eventually the corporations have to change. They realize their consumers do not want what they're providing, Of course, it's a whole lot easier if you can get to the corporate head and just get him to or her to make the change. So.
Yeah. But no, it's a process. I have arguments almost on a continuous basis with people around me in shops and in stores and in on the street, and now with COVID-19 and all the masks and all the paraphernalia that is being chucked out and thrown away as a result of this situation, that's one more pile of garbage.
I was on an anti-straw crusade for so many years back when I lived in Aramble, and there were so many straws, plastic straws littering the beach. It just horrified me. And Tommy and I always drank lemon soda, and they put a plastic straw in the lemon soda, and because of the carbonation, the bubbles, it just pops out and falls on the beach. You can't even, it's totally ridiculous. Like, why are you giving a straw? And then sometimes they put it through a lemon slice or nimbu, to hold it in there. But I used to always scold people and say, no straw. I was known as the no straw man. And there was a locally famous episode where I was at the Aramble bus stand, and I said no straw. They brought out a straw, and I was just sitting at a pav bhaji shop or something, and I just went ballistic. I said no straw.
Oh God.
Like that. But sometimes my reaction to that, like in that pav bhaji stand, was part of that feeling the whiteness thing come in, because what I would do is I'd look around, all the Indians got their cold drinks without a straw, but a straw came out for me. And I know the intention was probably to be respectful or to think that, well, this is what the tourist wants, but it's like, I didn't want to be treated any different than anybody else. So that played into it too. Why am I the only one getting a straw?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I have a plan right now, with an artist designer friend of mine called Velan, and we were thinking of actually looking at certain park spaces that are fast being covered with concrete, but looking at certain park spaces and public open spaces and trying to understand whether it's possible to actually grow some fruit trees, which in fact one person on in Divar is doing right now. He has planted lots of, Marius is his name, Marius Fernandez, and he has planted a lot of these fruit trees that are lining the streets, and everyone can use them. And there's, the red bhaji and the Malabar bhaji, and they're all growing.
This is
And
being done by an artist?
no, so the inspiration is from a person who actually is trying to revive a lot of the old festivals in Goa. So I would say yes, he does have a very creative and artistic
But
bent
he's
of mind.
actually planting fruit trees.
Yes, in
Okay.
public spaces. And so that's what we were also talking about, is to, get the ear of maybe the local cooperator, and get this opportunity to use these spaces for public, to put plants and trees that are actually going to be useful in a situation where there was no food. And that did happen for some time, because Goa depends on Karnataka and Maharashtra for almost all its supplies, and we didn't have vegetables for a month. And that was the situation. And it really makes you think then that, there are so many ways in which we can help ourselves, and we have to take that step. And and not say the government has to do it, and that body has to do it, and so has to do it, but i I have to do it. Like you said, it starts from home. So yeah, that's the next plan, to actually activate something like that with the
Well, I always feel that
with food.
planting trees is one of the simplest things you can do. I mean, anybody can take the time to go out to a nursery, buy a nice tree, and plant it in your backyard, or try to start it from a seed, even, And it's like the more
Yeah,
trees we have, the better. I mean, who can be against a tree? I mean, it gives you shade in the city, shade along the roadside. They help with global warming, the whole deal. They help retain moisture and shade. So I think we should touch
yeah.
on maybe just a couple more things. I wanted to talk about, there were two things I wanted to talk, and this is getting long, I know, but I think people will be interested. What do you feel about mixed messaging in activism? Because this is one thing I find problematic, to use that word. Um, like the Sierra Club.
Do you want to give an example?
No, I want to give an example, like the Sierra Club in the US. I mean, I was a longtime supporter. I used to give them money in the old days when I still was living in the US. I would always give a donation to the Sierra Club. That was one of the groups out in the ACLU. I mean, there are different groups that I would give money to once in a while on a small level. But, then the Sierra Club started coming out, and recently, and now they're quite active with making statements for transgender rights and all kinds of things that are not related to environmentalism. And basically, they were a conservationist society to begin with, that were just involved in let's conserve our wilderness spaces. And I know there's a desire to be unified among the progressive movement, and everybody supports each other. But I think sometimes in doing that, and especially in an issue as critical as global warming, it turns some people off. People who are a little more conservative, they might be totally okay with supporting, the idea of preserving green spaces, but they're not okay with
Yeah,
transgender rights. So why
yeah,
confuse the issues and possibly turn off supporters and donors? And then it also goes to language. It's like how things are presented. Because like I know, like even in Udaipur here, if you talk about cleaning the lake, or keeping the lake clean, everybody will support you on that. If you talk
right.
about preserving the green mountains, let's preserve our greenery in the mountains, everybody will support you on that. But if you start talking a whole bunch of stuff about global warming and carbon emissions and blah, 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 and you throw out all of this language that is popular among the activists who are highly involved, but the average person will just tune it off then. That's just like, well, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know if I support that. So sometimes I think you've got to keep the messaging very direct as to this is what we want to do.
Yeah.
We want to save this green space. We want to make sure the lake is clean. And then you get much more support. But I mean, there's different, you might feel differently. I don't know.
No, I quite agree. But, you know, in terms of dealing with organizations or NGOs, I have seen this, that sometimes individuals begin to make the decisions. And if the individual changes and their point of view changes, then, you know, the intent of the organization or the intent of the activism also shifts. It's also because of trends, no? That, you know, what is trending now would be good to use as a mode to get funding or, you know, more outreach. It's multi-layered, so sometimes it's just not a simple process. There are many things at play. So I think that sometimes creates this sort of a shifting scenario, and it's not effective because it really does confuse people.
So the social signaling that the groups do is sometimes for fundraising or whatever, that they think they will like bring in some more money that way from a particular set because they signaled their virtue in that way.
Definitely, and that it dilutes, it really dilutes the issue altogether. It, you know, when it's fragmented like that, then people don't know really what to support. So it's important to have that goal and that path very clear, and sustain it, and I think that you know, that's effective. Like now, I mean, because of COVID-19, how many different art programs or camps, or online camps or whatever, are inviting artists to think about their time, which is a good thing because anyway, automatically everyone will respond to their time in some way. But it sort of draws attention to the you know, to the situation and uses it in some way. So, you know, giving awards or calling for applications at a time like this, it's using the situation, no, in some way. So I think it's similar. Yeah. And it's
the other thing I want to caution about, and that is in the global warming issue. So I think, what's his name? Richard Attenborough, the filmmaker,
yes.
the British Richard Attenborough, the wildlife documentarian. He did a very nice documentary on the global warming and the planet changing and blah, blah, blah. And he had a scene in there where he claimed that the walruses, because of global warming and the lack of sea ice, were so packed together on this rocky island that there were so many people that the walruses were actually getting pushed off the cliff, and the walruses were falling to their death. And this was part of the documentary. And it was very shocking and heartbreaking to anybody who saw it. It was just horrible. But then later there were videos that claimed to debunk that and said that actually that behavior has been going on and has been documented since the 1920s, and that there's old film footage of the same thing, and it only has to do with overpopulation, but has nothing to do with sea ice or global warming. I don't know which one is true, but I think when environmental activists or any kind of activists exaggerate problems or tell a little white lie to bolster their cause, it actually, because you've also had some climate activists make claims that later had to backtrack, I know. So when they do that, they really subvert the whole movement, because then, you know, there's a lack of faith that develops, which is the last thing you need, because you need faith in this, you know.
Yeah.
You need to understand the actual facts. You need to understand that, yes, the climate is warming. Yes, we are losing sea ice, and, all of this is true, but be careful what you say, because if you exaggerate it too much and then, the people who are opposed to you catch that, they'll use it as a propaganda tool to debunk you, and to cast aspersion against the entire movement. So.
Yeah. I think very effectively, it's good to look at it in a local sense. Identify the relationship of a larger effect of climate change within the region, within a local, understandable, and measurable space. Then
Right.
then it's possible to see a very real situation. There is no imagination, you're looking at it. So there's no space for lying uh, or manipulation or some kind of pretense, because it's all there. And I think that is something that's important, that you it's good, of course, to be aware of everything, but to stay focused on what is right here, what is around. So
Right.
then, uh, it's uh, it's something that is evidence based. You know,
Yes.
Here's the evidence. This is what is happening. This is in
Yes.
front of you.
This is reality.
Consider it. Yeah,
And once again,
yeah.
think
I'm not
globally and
talking
act
about the
locally.
polar ice cap. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say
Things that
that
people can
that's
relate
what it
to.
is. To
Things people can relate to. Because nobody wants to go to a
Yes.
picnic by the lake and see garbage in the lake. Those are the things that people can relate to.
No,
Um,
yeah, nobody wants formalin in fish that they're going to eat.
oh, yeah. I mean, I remember Tommy and I were in Cambodia, and we went to Sihanoukville, which is a beach. Oh my God, there was so much plastic and garbage floating in the ocean. It was disgusting. And this was supposed to be a major beach. And Tommy, I didn't even want to go in. Tommy dragged me in. And it's so disgusting when you're in water and there's plastic bags floating by and, you know, disposable diapers. I mean, it's just incredibly horrible. Now I've heard that since then they've cleaned that beach up, but I was appalled. And, that was a big wake up call for me, because it was like, well, if this is the way the beaches are going to be looking after a while, people better start worrying about this.
Yeah, really. It's it's very worrisome. But I would say these two things. That is, I think that one must prevent oneself from getting over anxious, because that's of no use, and also from being extremely sentimental or romanticizing, which I said earlier about the environment. We have to be pragmatic. We really really have to look at a very practical way of identifying these things, because there are many questions when you're talking about solar energy. People don't know now what to do with how to get rid of solar panels that have passed their life, or electric cars for that matter. So even renewable energy and even green energy comes with some cost on it.
Right. It seems
And
like every solution brings along its own problems too. So you get rid of the
yeah,
plastic
so
straw, everybody's using a paper straw, but then you have more trees going down basically. So it's
yeah, so it's a debatable space, and I think that awareness also has to be there, that it's not just a one track thing. It's important to be aware of both sides of everything and then make good and sustainable choices,
right. I
because
mean,
I
my
think
thing is
that's
always like, do you need the straw at all? Why do you need a straw? If you have a clean glass, you shouldn't need a straw. So it's maybe in these COVID
Yeah,
times, it's
and
probably still weird, but normally I would say
the whole question of artists also using a lot of materials that are not sustainable, or participating in biennales and fairs across the world, using tons of packaging and material to send it here and there. And you know that once you begin to talk about it, there's so much. But I think that it's also about each individual understanding what their capacity is, what they want to stop and what they want to continue, how they are going to look at it, how much privilege do they have, how long they can continue the same thing without feeling it, poking them in some way. So I think that there are many things that we have to deal with, and we can do it. We can do it one at a time.
Lina,
And
this is getting really long, so I think I should probably end it. I think we're probably up to an hour at least, don't you?
gosh, yes, it's been quite long, but
I
a
think
very
we
nice
better end it.
conversation.
But it's been otherwise people are never going to get through this whole thing.
No,
But Lina,
no.
it was wonderful. Let's make our official goodbyes. So
Thank you, Vasbo.
thank you, Lina Vincent. This is Wazwo Xwazwo Evil O from Udaipur with Lina Vincent in Goa. Goodbye. Wave goodbye, Lina. Everybody waves goodbye. Okay.